Well. Here we are again, back on Vermeer, back at the choice that defined the franchise. Which way will the dial swing this time? Ashley or Kaidan? The racist or the boring one? Except, hold on a second. What does that actually mean? Why is Kaidan boring? What does it mean to be the boring one? And in what universe are these two things in equivalence? Do you ever get deja vu? I love Kaidan. Mass Effect fans give you funny looks when you say that, but it's the truth. I don't think he's boring. I think there's a long and complicated explanation as to why people think he's boring, but I don't actually think it's true. Originally, I had planned for this and the Ashley video to be the same video, but the thing of it is, these two statements are on fundamentally different playing fields. They're not in opposition as much as they are just two fundamentally different arguments. One is an argument about politics and philosophy, and one is an argument about character arcs and personality. When people argue against saving Ashley, they're generally not doing so because they think she's a boring or uninteresting character. It's because they don't like her, and that's a fundamentally different kind of argument. Kaidan isn't problematic, he's aproblematic. That's people's issue with him, is that he doesn't seem to have any problems. He's a nice guy, he's well adjusted, he isn't harbouring any grudges or unresolved trauma. He's just a normal guy. Or is he? Kaidan Alenko is the first companion that you meet in the series. He's an Alliance Marine and a biotic, meaning he can do magic space telekinesis with his brain. Kaidan was among the first generation of humans who developed biotic powers, and as such he's implanted with one of their earlier, less stable L2 implants that gives him chronic headaches. Despite that, he's a very well-adjusted guy, dependable, a little soft-spoken, and of course a potential love interest for female shepherds. This is typically where profiles of Kaidan end, with more or less sass about how there's nothing to his character. And that is somewhat fair. Kaidan presents as a much simpler character than the rest of the team, with their family baggage and existential crises about their species. He's the white human man, the default position from which things are made more interesting, as fair or not as that may be. After all, while Ashley gets the controversial line on the Citadel, Kaidan gets...
Sure is peaceful here.
The reality is that Kaidan has just as much depth as the rest of the Mass Effect 1 crew. It's just that he's written and personified in a way that hides that fact, because Kaidan's single most defining characteristic is discipline and self-control. Here's a fact. Kaidan is one of the most powerful biotics in the series. Like, you remember that barrier thing from the suicide mission that only an incredibly powerful biotic like Jack or Samara can actually pull off? Yeah, Kaidan would qualify. Kaidan broke a Turian's neck with a kick when he was 16. Even Liara comments on how impressive his abilities are. Yet, this fact might still come as a surprise to some people. Kaidan is the personification of show don't tell, because, well yes, he is a biotic in gameplay. There's only one cutscene in the entire series where he actually uses biotics, and it's during the Citadel DLC, if you romanced him. Introducing a character's powers in a flashy way is extremely important in cementing those powers in a player's mind. One of the strangest details about Mass Effect 1 is that Kaidan really doesn't get an introduction in the way that every other companion does. He's in the first cutscene in the game, sure, but at that point it's not really clear that he's one of the most important characters in the game and not just Joker's co-pilot. Ashley is introduced running and taking out 2 drones with a pistol dive. Rex is introduced being comically unthreatened by cops. Garrus is introduced by shooting a guy in the head behind a hostage. Tali is introduced by throwing a grenade at potential assassins. Liara's intro isn't badass in the same way, but it cements her more as being a scientist type and over her head. Kaidan doesn't get this moment. He's just... here. Even Jenkins has a stronger introduction than Kaidan, and he dies 5 minutes into the game. It's a very strange omission. Kaidan is not the kind of guy who's going to show off his powers in a big flashy way, but the game never once puts him in a situation where he needs to, thus showing the audience what he's capable of. This combination of a subdued personality and a lack of chances to show off within the game is why he leaves with the reputation of being boring in the minds of most players. If you don't go looking for the things that make Kaidan interesting, the game is not going to show them to you. I mean, let's just reframe the things I've said so far. Kaidan is a guy who keeps himself under constant rigid self-control because when he doesn't, he accidentally kills people with his mind. There's something there. That's a pretty interesting single-sentence description of a character. But it's not the one you'll ever hear about Kaidan because it's not the one that the game makes obvious. It's something you intuit from putting together different conversations and connecting dots. For example, Kaidan is an L2 implant biotic, and it just so happens that every other L2 you meet in the game is a total basket case. Kidnapping politicians, transing scientists with drugs to use as human shields, joining the cult of a guy called Kyle. I mean, who would do that? That fact alone contributes a lot to your understanding of Kaidan and why he is the way he is, but it's only a fact that makes itself clear if you fully engage with all of the somewhat repetitive minor side quests in the game. Video games are the genre of big personalities, and Mass Effect is no exception. The bigger and more dramatic a personality is, the more beloved the character is. Kaidan is not lacking in personality, but it's not a big personality. Kaidan is a very subtle kind of guy, driven by his relentless self-control. Most people read his lack of passion as just being boring, but if you instead read it as an intrinsic part of his character, then you can quickly see that there's more to him than meets the eye. A few years ago now, I made a video about Jacob Taylor, a character who genuinely is quite boring. On the surface, these two men seem quite similar. They're both subtle, they're both generally nice, they're both unquestioning of your orders for the most part, they're both biotics. The difference is in writing intention. Jacob is supposed to be cool. He's supposed to be like your bro. Except that doesn't work because that just makes him a less good Garrus. Kaidan is not supposed to be cool. He's supposed to be dependable. More than anyone else on the team, even Ashley, Kaidan is supposed to be a guy that you can trust 100%. He's got no secret ambitions or agendas. He's just here to help you, and he'll do everything in his power to do it. No matter what situation you're in, he can be depended on to keep a level head. Shepard actually makes that clear in a comment to Ashley.
If I want an opinion from the head, I go to Alenko. When I want one from the heart, I go to you.
Because I just can't help myself. Ashley is a Kirk type while Kaidan is a Spock type, and that Spock comparison goes deeper than you might think. Just like a Vulcan, Kaidan is suppressing his emotion in order to stay logical, but that emotion is still in there somewhere. It's commented on several times that Kaidan gets severe headaches because of his implants, but never once does Kaidan himself actually complain about that, because he's exactly the kind of guy who would smile and grit his teeth through immense pain so as to not burden you with it. In fact, the only times when he does show that kind of vulnerability is if you go through with his romantic subplot. Kaidan's romance in Mass Effect 1 is easily the best in the game, but the same reasons that make it good are also the reasons it's had a terrible effect on his legacy as a character. The game does something for Kaidan's romance that it doesn't do for any other romance in the series, which is, if you're romancing Kaidan, then it fundamentally changes every single conversation in the game that you have with him. He explains more of his backstory, he's more emotionally open, he cracks more jokes, he lets himself be more vulnerable. It's an entire angle of the character that most people don't get to see because most people still wrongfully plays a male Shepard. Here's an example of what I mean.
The Council doesn't want to believe anything's wrong. I'd call it human nature, but...
I hear you. It just seems like a group that's been around as long as the Council should see this coming. Sorry if I got too informal. Protocol wasn't a big focus back in Bot.
Council doesn't want to believe anything's wrong. I'd call it human nature, but...
I hear you. It just seems like a group that's been around as long as the Council should see this coming. I mean, it's funny, we finally get out here, and the final frontier was already settled. And the residents don't even seem impressed by the view. Or the dangers.
Well, well. You're a romantic. Did you sign on for the dream, Alenko? Secure a man's future in space?
Yeah, I read a lot of those books when I was a kid, where the hero goes to space to prove himself worthy of a woman he loves, or, you know, for justice. Or maybe I was a romantic in the beginning, but I thought about it after brain camp. Biotic acclimation and temperance training. I'm not looking for the dream. I just want to do some good. See what's out here. Sorry if I got too informal. Protocol wasn't a big focus back in Bot.
Every conversation with Kaidan is like this. With a romancing Shepard, they're much longer and much more personal in a way that's not true of Ashley's romance, which generally just adds some flirting at the end of a conversation. Here it almost feels like parts of the conversation have been cut out unless you're playing the romance. On the one hand, I think this is clever writing. We've established that Kaidan is a guy who keeps things suppressed, so the fact that he's more open with Shepard is a great way to show that there's a deeper connection between the two and he feels more comfortable around her. The romance is written to make sure that Shepard is the one being forward and initiating things, which has its own weird side effect of making it really easy to accidentally romance Kaidan, but it makes sense character-wise because Kaidan would never be the forward one. This extra sharing is how you know he's interested, not the flirting that Ashley does. He even makes this clear in one of the best lines of the subplot.
Shepard, you make me feel human.
That's a great hook for a romantic story. In fact, it's exactly why Spock has so many female fans, and it gives it a much more dynamic hook than the other romances in the first game, which are much more typical. It's the exact kind of angle that all of the romantic arcs would be built upon in the subsequent games, where a romantic arc is an extension of the character's own personal journey. But on the other hand, because anyone that doesn't romance Kaidan never sees this greater depth of personality, the impression they leave with is that it doesn't exist at all. This is why there's such a big overlap between FemShep players and Kaidan defenders. There is a lot of hidden depth to find about Kaidan, but the problem is that most players can't even start digging if they make the wrong decision in character creation. This is not me trying to say that it's your fault if you think Kaidan is boring. It's the game's fault. The game sets him up for failure in this department quite drastically. Something that isn't even helped in the sequels when the games keep forgetting that he's a space wizard and just recycle Ashley's animations. Even beyond all the stuff we've been talking about, visually Kaidan is obviously the most boring one. He's the bland white guy in a game full of weird aliens. Of course he's the most boring one. But even there's more to this than meets the eye, because Kaidan is not a typical manly man, and I think that's important. Toxic masculinity is a buzzword that's been thrown around so much that it's begun to lose all meaning, but once upon a time it was a useful term that meant things. It's a way to talk about some of the traits commonly associated with masculinity, like strength, confidence, aggression, and not showing emotion, can be warped into negatives and contribute to both making you a worse person and a much less happy and fulfilled person. This kind of stuff dominated video games, especially back in 2007 when Mass Effect 1 was released. I mean, a year after this, Starkiller was unleashed onto the world and still haunts us to this day. Kaidan is a glorious contradiction of all of these ideas of what an action hero should be, of what it means to be a strong man. He's quiet, thoughtful, self-controlled, and takes a backseat in the relationship. But the game never uses these facts to imply that he's any less of a man or any less of a badass. He's a shining example of positive masculinity in an era of gaming where that was basically unheard of. Kaidan isn't James Vega, the muscle-bound, tatted and scarred badass soldier man. He's a different sort of man, and I think there's a lot of value in having examples out there like Kaidan. Like Ashley, Kaidan grows over the trilogy. He reaches out to more people, forming closer connections, not just with Shepard, but with the whole crew. Shares that openness with everyone, even becoming a teacher in Mass Effect 3. Teaching other young biotics the lesson he's learned. But only if he lives. There's no right choice on Vermeer, as snarky as me or anyone else will get about it. Both characters deserve to live. That's what makes it an interesting choice. That's why it's such a definitive point in the franchise. That's why Mass Effect is so popular to begin with. If you choose Ashley, then Kaidan stays alone. He never learns to reach out, never grows those deeper connections with people, and he deserves that chance just as much as Ashley deserves a chance to outgrow her bigotries. So maybe Kaidan is a little boring, but that's not all he is, and it's not all that he has to be.
Why me? Why not her?
It wasn't your call, Alenko. I had to choose. I chose you.
Thank you for watching, and a very special thank you to my patrons for your continued support. It means a lot to me. If you'd like to see your name up here or get access to Patreon exclusive videos, then please consider signing up. For the other half of this little project, you can click up here to see the case against Ashley, or for a different Mass Effect video, why not click here to see that FemShep is actually the superior option? Maybe kind of, maybe not, depends on your own personal preferences.